Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The former Conservative leader, Ian Duncan Smith, has called on the Prime Minister to resign following the party's worst result in English local elections since 1995. Mr Duncan Smith said she was, in effect, a caretaker Prime Minister. It comes as senior Conservatives have called for compromise and unity. More than 1,300 Conservative councillors lost their seats while Labour failed to make the gains it had hoped for. Our political correspondent Nick Eardley reports.
Urgently seeking a solution. Tories mulling over devastating local election results, trying to find a way to solve the party's troubles. These members are in Scotland. There weren't any elections here this week, but many agree failing to deliver Brexit was behind the election drubbing. And this former leader has had enough. He believes Theresa May has lost her authority and has to go now.
We have, in a sense, a kind of caretaker Prime Minister at the moment. You could argue a caretaker leader of the Labour Party, but a caretaker Prime Minister. And I think, therefore, making fundamental decisions about where we go with this would be a big mistake.
The Conservatives always knew that voters were likely to give them a bloody nose this week, but the extent, losing 1,300 councillors, was worse than they feared. And because of that, some are saying their patience has run out. It's not the first time we've heard senior Tories calling for Mrs May to go. In the past, she simply ignored their calls. But it is, again, a reminder that many in the Conservative Party think Mrs May just can't deliver. Others, though, say there should be compromise with Labour to make sure Brexit is delivered.
I think we do need a move for compromise, but compromise often involves looking at the different positions of different groups and coming up with something in between. Clearly, I've supported the Prime Minister's deal, which I think is better, but there are options in between.
Talks between the government and opposition will resume early next week. Sources tell me there are still substantial differences. But after Labour had a tough time at the polls too, Jeremy Corbyn says there is impetus to get a deal done. But opinion in Labour is split. Some point to losses in Brexit supporting areas and say failing to deliver would be a breach of trust.
I think we've got to leave because we had a referendum. We asked people whether they wanted to leave the EU. By a small majority, they said they did, and we said we would honour the result.
But many Labour MPs are arguing the exact opposite, that the party needs to back another referendum and ultimately staying in the EU. They point to huge gains at the local elections for the Greens and the big winners, the Liberal Democrats.
I think there were some local factors, but there's no doubt that the big national factor was the issue about Brexit. Liberal Democrats have been against Brexit and campaigned against Brexit, campaigned for a final say for British people for the last nearly 3 years. And I think people have heard that now from the Liberal Democrats, that we are the Stop Brexit party.
These elections have posed big questions for a government struggling to deliver Brexit. Answering them won't necessarily be easy. Nick Eardley, BBC News.
Senior Conservative figures have today been talking up the possibility of a compromise with Labour to secure a breakthrough Brexit deal. It follows the party's worst local election results in 24 years, with 1 in 4 Tory councillors across England losing their seats. The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, seen as a potential future leadership candidate, said the priority is to get on and deliver Brexit. The Scottish Conservative leader, Ruth Davidson, called for negotiating teams from the two main parties to get a deal over the line. More from our correspondent, Angus Walker.
Trying to put a smile back on Tory faces, Scottish Conservative leader Ruth Davidson, doing her best to rally the party despite the worst local election results in a quarter of a century.
Yesterday's local government elections, we saw angry voters give both the Labour Party and our own party an almighty kicking. So I say to the negotiating teams of our party and the Labour Party, who are currently locked in talks, get Brexit sorted, get a deal over the line and let Britain move on.
The heavy defeat means some in the cabinet are now more willing to do a deal with Labour.
We should be open to compromises that deliver Brexit, and then we can get on and move on and talk about all the other things.
And would a customs union deliver Brexit?
Well, I think that we need to be open to those discussions, to the results of those discussions, and open to compromise critically that can deliver Brexit and get us out of the European Union.
Accepting a compromise deal with Labour gets the backing of Tory MPs like Sir Paul Beresford, who's just seen the Conservatives lose control of his local council in Surrey.
It's more of a wake-up call for the Conservative MPs as well as the leadership. We need to get the Brexit thing sorted if we possibly can. We need to reunify and we need to move forward into the powerful party we are. If we don't do that, we'll go back to 1997 when John Major had a split party under him and the public didn't like it and we lost.
Down on his farm, defeated Tory councillor John Muggeridge is, well, feeling very down. He thinks Theresa May has to take most of the blame for the heavy losses, and he'd like to see a new breed of leader that could bring the Tory herd back together.
Well, my personal thing, Boris, but I mean, a lot of people don't like Boris, but I like our Boris. I like a straightforward person myself, not somebody that talks around corners.
What was striking was that the Tories lost seats in traditional strongholds, the home counties, for example. When the Tories lose control of councils in places like Dorking here in leafy Surrey, then the party leadership really needs to take a long, hard look at what's going wrong. But Labour also suffered significant losses. The results, a wake-up call for both main parties. Get on with Brexit, the overriding message, but Labour is cautious about doing a deal with the Prime Minister.
She waited 2.5 years to after the deadline passed to say to Labour, come on, let's sit round the table. You know, I think she's the worst Prime Minister that this country has ever seen. So we're not, we are not in politics to help bail out the Prime Minister and a really bad deal.
The voters have spoken. The politicians are now trying to find answers, and fast. Angus Walker, ITV News.
Well, as you've been hearing, both the Scottish and Welsh Conservatives have been holding their annual conferences. The ITV Wales political editor Adrian Masters is at the Welsh conference. Adrian, was the real issue Brexit or was it the party leadership?
It's all of those things. It's a party that is down, divided, browbeaten, worried about the future and frustrated too that we're talking about things like that when they want to be focusing on issues that matter to the Welsh Conservatives. But when you get a Prime Minister coming here being heckled by a Conservative activist the day after those massive defeats in the English local elections and in a week which saw her sack her Defence Secretary, it's difficult not to be distracted by those noises off. Distracted too by this becoming a sort of hustings, an unofficial leadership hustings. Not one, but 4 potential candidates. And you saw some of them in Angus's report there. Sajid Javid, the Home Secretary, was speaking here. His speech was a leader speech, apart from the fact he's not a leader. He denied that he was doing that in his speech, but you couldn't really think otherwise. Also tonight at a dinner, Boris Johnson speaking. So this is a party that is worried, bracing itself for further defeats, wondering how low things are going to go.
All right, Adrian Masters in Wales, thank you. Well, Angus is back in the studio now. Angus, any kind of Brexit compromise, it's just not going to please everyone, is it?
No, it's not. But with the dust settling on these election results, really 2 pressure points are emerging. First of all, pressure on the Prime Minister herself. There will be those using the Sunday papers, Sunday TV programmes tomorrow to call for her to step down sooner rather than later. She's due on Tuesday to meet Sir Graham Brady, the chair of the 1922 committee, who would oversee any leadership contest. That will be a big day for her. Also pressure on the Conservatives and Labour to come up with a compromise on Brexit, and the guidance I'm hearing is if that is going to happen, it would happen towards the end of next week. But then the question would be, would that deal, when it's put back to the Commons, if it is, how would that change the arithmetic in the Commons? Would the backlash from Tory MPs unhappy with it be more than the number of Labour MPs it might bring behind the deal itself?
Interesting times. Angus, for now, thank you.
On the one hand, an appeal for Tory unity and senior ministers calling for a compromise with Labour to make sure Brexit is delivered. But at the same time, former Conservative leader Ian Duncan-Smith is telling Theresa May it's time to go. All this after the Tories' worst local election results since 1995, with the loss of more than 1,300 council seats, with tensions out in the open at the party's Welsh conference today. Darshna Soni has been there.
Delivering his diagnosis on those awful election results, the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock.
We, of course, meet at a difficult time for our party.
The Welsh Conservatives held their conference in a venue funded by the European Union. But of course it's the UK's exit from the EU being blamed by some Tories here for their poor results.
So what should we do next?
But Mr Hancock's message that it's time to compromise with Labour to ensure Brexit is delivered hasn't gone down too well with the party faithful here. I sat down with Maya Reeves, who's been a member since the 1970s, and her friend Lisa Francis.
I would support a customs union, so, you know, that's my view.
You look very shocked at that.
Well, you know, we have to agree to disagree, because otherwise...
Exactly.
We're old friends.
That made you nearly choke on your lunch. Are you worried about what it's doing to your party?
Of course, because we deserve better. It is confusing, and it hurts. It hurts.
But how to heal that hurt? One option being discussed here, whether a new leader would help revive the party's performance.
I personally think that Theresa May isn't actually listening to her members.
So do you think it's time for her to go now?
I do. I think it was time 2, 3, 4 months ago.
One man said to be preparing for a possible vacancy at number 10, the Home Secretary. Sajid Javid told delegates he once worked on his father's market stalls in Wales. The trips were always lucrative, he joked.
I said, Dad, what's the secret to your success? Why are you proving so popular in Newport? And he replied, it's my accent, son. They don't think I'm Punjabi, they think I'm Welsh.
Would it help my blood pressure if we got a new party leader? Our Prime Minister has done a fantastic job under such difficult, pressurised circumstances.
But is it time for her to go now?
The Prime Minister has made it quite clear that once the Brexit deal is delivered, then she will stand aside to allow a new leader, and I think that that is the right approach.
And so opinion here among the grassroots just as divided as it is nationally, with little agreement on the cause of their symptoms or how to treat them.
Darshana Soni there. Well, as both major parties lick their wounds after the local elections, there are plenty of Labour figures in pro-Brexit areas claiming the party has been punished for trying to obstruct a Brexit deal. Talks are still going on between Labour and government ministers aimed at reaching a compromise, with both Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn declaring they want to agree. The impasse could be unblocked by a deal over a customs union. But how many of their own MPs could each leader rally behind it? Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, reports.
Not a setting you'd expect to find someone exploring partnership with the government. This week's May Day rally in Trafalgar Square.
Let me just say this government may well by this autumn be out of power.
Labour's Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell didn't mention Brexit, but behind the scenes he, alongside some of Jeremy Corbyn's top advisers, has been moving the search for a Brexit compromise to a new level of engagement.
Prime Minister, thank you very much for joining us.
Theresa May this week told MPs the talks had shown areas of agreement on Brexit between Labour and the Tories, which might just help her get her plan through Parliament.
I think, actually, there is a greater commonality in terms of some of the benefits of a customs union that we've already identified between ourselves and the official opposition.
One source close to the talks said that the meetings between Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn had been pretty awful, like two different species trying to communicate. But more recent meetings with Jeremy Corbyn's senior team and John McDonnell, Michael Gove as a senior Brexiteer on the government side stepping in as well, had gone much better. The two sides, it was said, are now engaged in much more serious talks than many people think, seeking out compromises the Tories could tolerate and which Labour might accept.
She has only one shot at having a respectable legacy as Prime Minister, and that's to deliver the first stage of Brexit, getting out of the European Union with a deal based on her withdrawal agreement. And this kind of compromise with the Labour Party is her only and last chance at getting that kind of legacy. So I would have thought that even the hyper-cautious Theresa May will feel that this really is the last chance she's got.
Government supporters of the reach out to Labour argue that all the Tory MPs who backed the Prime Minister's withdrawal deal the last time it came to the Commons, with its backstop provision, a temporary customs union in that, shouldn't mind backing a customs union for a little bit longer. Some, though, argue Tories will run a mile from such a plan, and you could end up with many more Labour MPs potentially supporting it than Tories, a reverse of when the 1931 national government was formed.
The nation is in trouble. The nation is in difficulties.
We are into the territory of Ramsay MacDonald. I was looking up the figures. When we had that unity government, that was pretty much dominated by the Conservatives, but him leading it. I think it was something like 540 Conservatives and the rest this National Labour group. We're into that territory. I've done the numbers on this. I think we're looking at, if the last indicative votes is anything to go by, maybe you'll get 26% Conservatives and the rest provided by Labour votes.
I think we would have more than them if they were to get 160. I think you might be looking to see 160 Tories going through this, but look, I mean, they're in a corner.
How would that go down with the party?
It won't go down very well with the Tory party.
How would it go down with your party?
Well, it depends on any deal. We're not going to sign up to any damn thing. We want a deal which protects jobs, which protects the environment, all the stuff that we've said many, many times.
Some think many more Tories will feel able to back the deal because the government isn't signing up to a permanent customs union but a temporary one until after a general election. The next government has firmed it up or negotiated something else.
You can perhaps agree on one thing now that would last for a few years and then go into the next election agreeing to disagree about the long-term goal. That is the kind of deal that might be put in place, and that is not something I believe that runs the risk of shedding, a huge bulk of the Conservative Party.
John McDonnell joining the talks at the Cabinet Office this week. Privately, many Labour figures have said they want the Tories alone to own Brexit. Has that calculation changed? One Cabinet Minister, listening to Labour in the room, thinks there's a 40% chance it has.
Gary Gibbon there. Well, earlier I spoke to the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, who was at the Welsh Party conference, and I asked him, does he accept the government's best chance now is to do a deal with Labour?
Well, I'd always prefer to do it with Conservative votes, but it's clear that we need compromise in the House of Commons in order to get this done. Right, I think that the best deal is the Prime Minister's deal, but that has been put to the vote 3 times, and it hasn't yet found a majority.
The difficulty is, you've just said at that conference you've been speaking at today, Jeremy Corbyn is the most dangerous party leader Britain has seen in a century. Well, that doesn't bode well for working together, does it?
Well, I absolutely think that he shouldn't be Prime Minister, and I think there's
but he should help you deliver Brexit.
Long list of reasons why that's true.
But he should help you deliver Brexit.
There are many Labour MPs, and I'd like to reach a compromise with enough to be able to get a deal over the line. So that doesn't, I don't demur from my view that Jeremy Corbyn would be a terrible Prime Minister, and we need to keep him out of number 10.
This is a man you are describing as a threat to national security, but you are then acknowledging that you want to do a deal with him over Brexit. What are the public to make of that?
They're to make of the fact that I want to deliver Brexit, and then I want to get on with delivering everything else that people want to see in order to keep Jeremy Corbyn out of Downing Street. It's a completely, it's a very clear position.
But the reality is, where we are now, that the obvious outcome of cross-party talks with Labour is your government being forced to move to Labour's position on a customs union, something Theresa May said she would never do.
Labour have obviously come into this saying that they'd rather have the customs union. We've come into it saying we'd rather have the Prime Minister's deal. I think the Prime Minister's deal is better than a customs union for lots of reasons.
And as we've said, the Prime Minister's deal has been roundly rejected. The difficulty, as you will well know, is engaging in discussion with Labour, potentially moving closer to the Labour position, means you alienate many on your own party. And arguably, you're in as big a mess as you have been throughout this whole 2-year process.
people want to see us leave. You know, I didn't have anybody on the doorsteps during the election campaign say, well, I'm worried about this detail or that detail. They just said, can't you just get on with it? That's the point I was making when I said we need compromise to be able to deliver Brexit and then get on to all of the other things that matter in life. If you voted Brexit, then voting for the deal that delivers Brexit seems the reasonable thing to do. But we haven't been able to persuade everybody to do that yet. And I think that, therefore, we need to talk to Labour, and that then requires compromise. That's my point, because I want to deliver Brexit, deliver on the referendum, and then get on to everything else.
You keep referring back to Mrs May's deal. It has been roundly rejected, and arguably that's one of the reasons why you were so badly trounced in these elections, because people think you're not moving forward, you're not offering anything new.
I think that not leaving the EU on the 29th of March was a mistake. I think we should have done. I voted for that repeatedly. That's the sense of frustration that I sensed from many, many Conservative-inclined voters, the frustration that we haven't been able to do that. So I very strongly think that that is what we should do.
Well, with me now is the Green Party MEP, Molly Scott-Cato. You did very well that night. You're in a small group of parties who did well. You all know that whenever the Greens do well, everyone says it's a protest vote. This isn't any different, is it?
This isn't a protest vote at all. As you say, we did extremely well, the best results in our history. We've got 3 times as many councillors now as before the elections, and there are 50 council chambers up and down the country where there's a strong Green voice. And people have voted for us because they know that we're strong on the environment, because they know we'll protect the environment against plastics, because we're strong on climate, and that's become such an important issue that it's delivered us a really good result.
There's no doubt that Brexit was a huge issue in these elections. You took councils in key Labour areas, crucially Labour areas which voted Leave. Why would people, Labour Leave voters, vote for the Green Party, which wants a second referendum, if not to make a protest vote?
So in my patch, for example, in Mendip, which is a strong Tory area, we went from 2 councillors to 10 councillors. In the Forest of Dean, a strong Labour area, we got an additional 6 councillors there. So people are voting for us in both those areas. But I think in Leave areas, what it's about is the fact that we haven't neglected the reason people voted for Brexit. Fundamentally, it wasn't about the European Union. It was about the way their communities had been neglected. We've got strong policies on stopping tax avoidance, on controlling corporations, on making sure there are strong local economies with good green jobs. And people understand that that means we care about them, and that's why they're rewarding us with a vote.
It's difficult to see how these forthcoming EU elections will be about anything other than Brexit, and this is going to be the real test for you, isn't it? Finally up against some of the pro-Brexit parties, Nigel Farage's party. The danger is you'll be crushed once again, isn't there?
I absolutely think we won't be crushed. I mean, we're the strongest Remain party. We've got more MEPs than the other parties that are strongly supporting Remain. But we've also got that additional commitment to the environment, and particularly our strong policies on climate change. We've seen how much that's rising up the agenda, and I think that's the reason we've got Remain plus climate. That's why we're going to do very well in these elections.
And how much do you think your success is in part because of the huge protests that we saw with Extinction Rebellion?
Well, Extinction Rebellion have transformed the conversation on climate, and that's needed. We've needed that for a long time. So Sky showed that 60% of people support their demands, but only 20% support their methods. So the solution to that is to have a fair voting system so that we have enough Greens in Parliament to really take through the radical action we need on the climate emergency.
Now, you see that much of the talk today is about the Tories and Labour working together to try and find a compromise deal on Brexit. I mean, is that the best way forward as far as you're concerned?
Well, the closer Labour get to agreeing a deal on Brexit, as obviously it's a disaster for the country and we would resist that, but that's bringing their voters across to us. It's making people leave the Labour Party and join the Green Party.
So you're not in favour of trying to find a deal?
Absolutely not. There isn't a good Brexit deal. The best future for our country is remaining in the EU. That's the platform we'll be standing on in the European elections, and I expect us to do very well.
Molly Scott-Cato, thanks very much for coming in. Thank you.